Welcome to the video for Chapter 5 of the Cambridge Introduction to Sanskrit, which is going to teach you about nominals. So, what are nominals or nominal forms? They include a couple of categories of words, such as nouns or substantives, like forest, mind, friend, person, thing, and so on. Pronouns, such as he, she, this, what, whoever. Adjectives, such as beautiful, precise, or new. Participles, such as running, standing, thinking, and so on. And all of these are grouped together here because of shared features. Specifically, they are all marked for the same grammatical categories, namely case, number, and gender. So let's begin by looking at case. Case is a technical grammatical term, and it's defined as that which indicates the role a nominal form plays in a sentence. What do we mean by that? Well, there are all sorts of roles that nominal forms or nouns can play in a sentence, such as the subject or the direct object. The subject is that which does something, the direct object is that which has something done to it. For example, in this sentence, the children baked the cake. Here with the verb baked, the children are the ones doing something, whereas the cake, the direct object, has something done to it. The children bake, the cake is being baked. There are many other roles. I can have a location, such as I am happy in the mountains. I can have a source. She is coming from the mountains. I can have a direction. He is going to the mountains. An instrument. He is cutting the cake with a knife. An indirect object. He gave some cake to his friend, and so on. Those are the roles that case can mark a noun for. Now, English expresses different case roles in two different ways. One with prepositions and two by means of word order. The first sentence here, the children baked the cake, is an example of case roles being expressed by means of word order. So the children baked the cake has the children before the main verb and the cake after the main verb. This is the only thing that expresses that the children are the subject and the cake is the direct object. If I were to change just the word order, the cake baked the children, then the cake, now standing before the main verb, would automatically be interpreted as the subject, whereas the children, now standing behind the main verb, would automatically be interpreted as the direct object, the thing being baked, no matter how unlikely, I admit, that is. Other roles are in English expressed by means of prepositions. So, for example, an instrument would be expressed by means of the preposition with. The father cut the cake with a knife. An indirect object could be expressed by means of the preposition to, or also for. We have an example of to in the sentence at the bottom. The child gave some cake to his friend. To his friend would be the indirect object, and it's here marked by means of the preposition to. Sanskrit has pretty much the same kinds of case roles or case functions that English does, but it expresses cases differently, namely by means of endings. These endings are added to what we call a noun stem. Remember, we had verb stems earlier, now we have noun stems. And to give you an example of such a noun stem, the word for forest is wana. And if I say wana with the hyphen at the end of the form, I'm using that hyphen to indicate that this is not a complete form, but instead it is just the stem. If I want to have a complete form of the word for forest, then I have to add a case ending. And for example, we have the genitive case ending wanasya, so sya, wanasya, which means of the forest. Wanat, which means from the forest. Wane, in the forest. Waneshu, in the forests. So all these different ideas that can be, or all these different roles that can be played by the word forest in different sentences are expressed solely by means of these endings that are added to noun stems. Let's thus look at the exact cases that Sanskrit has. There are 8 of them. And the first one in the traditional way of listing the cases is the so-called nominative. The nominative is the case of the subject of a sentence, i.e. what the sentence is about, and of anything that refers to that subject. The cat scratches the thief. The cat is the subject, it's the thing that the sentence is about. The dog sleeps. The dog is the subject. Again, the cat and the dog would therefore be in the nominative. He is the king, she is wise, she became queen, he did this as king, all have more than one nominative, because he is the king has he as the subject, but the king refers to he, describes him, and given that he is in the nominative, the king, the thing that which describes him, would also be in the nominative. She is wise, same thing, wise describes her, she is the subject, she thus is in the nominative, and therefore wise also is in the nominative. Look especially at the last example, they are seen by the king. Here, they is what the sentence is about, but note that even though they are the subject, they're not actually the ones that are doing anything, but rather whenever you have a sentence with a passive verb, they are seen would be passive, then the subject of such a passive sentence would be the thing that actually has something done to it. Still, we consider it to be the subject of the sentence, and we therefore put it into the nominative because it is that which the sentence is about, that which the sentence focuses on. Then, quite straightforward, the vocative, which is the case used to address someone. So, for example, O king, the guests have arrived. O king would be an example of a vocative. Old man, why do you sit beside the road? Old man would be a vocative, which you use to address someone. Next comes the accusative, which has two functions. First of all, it can refer to that which is affected by an action or by the action of a verb, which is also called the direct object of a verb. So, for example, the cat scratches the thief. The thief is the one who is affected by the scratching. Therefore, we consider him the direct object of the verb, and therefore the thief would stand in the accusative case. Similarly with the gods grant a favor. The gods are the subject. They are doing something, namely granting. They're granting what? A favor. That would be the thing that is affected by their action, the thing that is being granted. Therefore, we consider it the direct object of the verb, and therefore it stands in the accusative. The second function of the accusative is to express the goal of a motion. So, for example, in the sentence, the sage goes to the forest. To the forest in a Sanskrit sentence would stand in the accusative because it expresses the direction in which a motion is going or the goal of that motion. Next up is a case with a more useful name, the instrumental. The instrumental expresses the instrument with which something is done. So, for example, he cuts the cake with a knife. With a knife would be the instrument. In English, this is expressed by means of the preposition with, and in Sanskrit it would simply be expressed by means of an instrumental ending. Secondly, the instrumental refers to the person by whom something is done. So, for example, the cake was made by her. In a way, you could say that she is an animate or a living instrument by means of which or by whom something is done. So the cake was made by her. By her would also be an instrumental. And then finally, someone together with whom something is done. For example, he went into the forest with his friends. And here we can actually see that this same overlap of the two functions, instrument with which and person together with whom, exists in English and in Sanskrit. In English, we use the preposition with for both, and in Sanskrit, we would simply use the same instrumental case ending to express these two ideas. Next up is the dative, which expresses the person to whom the action of a verb is somehow relevant. So, for example, I bow to you. They showed this to him. This is relevant for you. So, to you, to him, for you would all be expressed by means of a dative case. And secondly, the dative is used in a special kind of construction, the so-called dative of purpose. She is striving for peace, or I give this to you for safekeeping. In Sanskrit would be expressed in the dative case. The ablative expresses any kind of source. That could be a place from which, so for example, we came from the city or out of the city. A time from which, they had been walking since dawn. A person from whom, we heard this from him. or also a reason for or reason because of which he acted out of anger or from anger. All of these are sources in a way, and a source in Sanskrit is expressed by means of the ablative case. Finally, we have the locative case, which is used to express any kind of location, spatial, temporal, abstract, to render ideas such as in, on, at, or near someone or something. So, for example, we have in the house, in the shade, on the mountain, all spatial locations, in the morning, which would be a temporal location, in my thoughts, which would be an abstract location, in my opinion, again abstract. In the plural, the locative can also express the idea of among, so for example, among my friends, or he was the best of or the best among all. And finally, the locative can also be used to express the goal of a motion. If I say she is going to the forest, then to the forest would typically be expressed in the accusative case. But if I say she goes into the forest, then this idea of into would be rendered by means of the locative case. Next up comes the category of number, and number in nouns or in nominal forms is the same as in verbs. We have singular, dual, and plural. The singular is used to refer to exactly one, the dual is used to refer to exactly two, and the plural is used to refer to more than two. And again, in Sanskrit, number would be indicated by means of endings. So, for example, I have Raja, which means king, Raja now, two kings, and Rajanach, which would mean kings, i.e. more than two kings, many kings. And those would be singular, dual, and plural, respectively. Finally, we have gender. And again, gender is here used as a grammatical term. It's not to be equated with biological sex. Sanskrit and English both have three grammatical genders: masculine, feminine, and neuter. In English, grammatical gender and biological sex actually overlap, and they're mostly visible in pronouns. So, for example, I see the man, he is standing in the street, he is referring to the man, and I'm using the masculine pronoun because I'm referring to someone who is biologically male. I see the woman, she is standing in the street, she is referring to the woman, and I've chosen she rather than he because I'm referring to someone who is biologically female. And then finally, I see the car, it is standing in the street, it refers to the car, and I've chosen the neuter pronoun because in English, anything that isn't biologically male or biologically female is referred to in the neuter as it. Sanskrit has the same genders, the same grammatical genders that English also does, masculine, feminine, and neuter. However, there are two big differences in how gender works in Sanskrit. The first is that in Sanskrit, gender is marked on all adjectives and pronouns and on many nouns. By marked, I mean that you can recognize the gender of a word just by looking at its ending. Now, in English, that isn't the case. In Sanskrit, it is the case, and we'll see what that looks like in just a minute. Secondly, another very important difference is that in Sanskrit, grammatical gender and biological sex don't necessarily overlap. If you remember in English, any biologically male being would be grammatically masculine, any biologically female being would be grammatically feminine, and anything else would be neuter, would be it. In Sanskrit, we have many words for biological females being grammatically feminine, but we have words for biological females that aren't grammatically feminine, and we have words that are grammatically feminine that don't refer to biological females. And so we have, for example, the noun vriksha, which means tree, which is grammatically masculine, but nadi, which means river, which is grammatically feminine, and wana, which means forest, which is grammatically neuter. So, grammatical gender and biological sex in Sanskrit don't necessarily overlap. So, all nominal forms are marked for these three categories, for case, number, and gender. This leads to a phenomenon that we call agreement, and agreement here again is used as a technical grammatical term. When an adjective or a pronoun refer to a noun, they need to agree in case, number, and gender with that noun. A noun has one fixed grammatical gender, so it's either masculine or feminine or neuter. Adjectives and pronouns, on the other hand, have forms for all the different genders so that they can agree with any kind of noun. An adjective referring to a masculine noun, for example, thus needs to appear in its masculine form. If you look at the table on here, you can see in the English examples, a beautiful boy, a beautiful girl, a beautiful forest. The word beautiful each time appears in exactly the same form. In Sanskrit, on the other hand, the adjective beautiful needs to appear in its masculine form if it agrees with a masculine noun or if it refers to a masculine noun, in its feminine form if it refers to a feminine noun, and in its neuter form when it refers to a neuter noun. And therefore we get, for example, shobanach, balach. Balach is a noun that is grammatically masculine, and therefore we have to use the masculine form of the adjective, shobanach. Shobana kanya. Kanya, meaning girl, is a grammatically feminine noun, and therefore the adjective needs to appear in its feminine form. And finally, shobanam vanam. Vanam is a grammatically neuter noun, and therefore the adjective needs to appear in its neuter form, shobanam. Agreement is required not just for gender, but for all of these three categories, for case, number, and gender. So, for example, if I have a nominative singular form, balach, boy, balach is masculine, is inherently masculine. Every noun has a gender, and balach has masculine gender. And balach here stands in the nominative singular masculine, and therefore the adjective that refers to it also needs to stand in the nominative singular masculine. So we have shobanach, balach. In the genitive singular, on the other hand, balasya, which means of the boy, we then need an adjective that stands also in the genitive singular, and that also is masculine, so as to agree with the masculine noun boy. So we have shobanasya, balasya, which would then mean of the beautiful boy. Similarly, if I have balanam, which is the genitive plural of the word for boy, meaning of the boys, I then need an adjective that also stands in the genitive plural and that also is masculine in order to agree with balanam, which is genitive plural masculine. And so I need shobananam balanam, of the beautiful boys. In Sanskrit, case, number, and gender is marked on both forms, on the adjective and on the noun, whereas in English we have this marking only once, the beautiful boy, of the beautiful boy, and of the beautiful boys. Unfortunately, what we just saw is made a little more complicated by the fact that there is more than one way of expressing these different categories that we just described. So more than one way of expressing the different cases, numbers, and genders. And these different ways are basically different sets of endings expressing the same kind of information. So, for example, a genitive plural may be expressed with one ending in the case of one noun and with a different ending in the case of another noun. Which set of endings is used depends on the final sound of a noun stem. So, for example, all noun stems that end in R, which are also called long R stems or long A stems, use the same set of endings. All nouns that end in S, so-called S stems, use the same set of endings, and so on. This then has the effect that endings that express the same information, for example, nominative feminine singular, can actually look different from each other. So, for example, sa shobhana nari, which literally means this beautiful woman, has three forms that are all nominative singular feminine, sa, shobhana, and nari. But because these forms belong to different declensions, their nominative singular feminine endings can be different from each other. Sa, shobhana look the same, a and a, but nari ends in an e, and this e is the nominative singular feminine ending. Even though it is different from a, it expresses the same information. So what we will need to do is, for each of these declensions, for each of these noun stems that we find in Sanskrit, we have to memorize the individual sets of endings. To give you some more examples, tasyah shobhanayach naryach would be the genitive of the expression above, so it would be of this beautiful woman. Syach, ayach, and ach are the different forms that the same ending, namely genitive, singular, feminine, can take. And we get yet another set of endings for the genitive plural feminine, where we have ta sam, shobana nam, nari nam. So we have this sam, we have anam, we have enam. 3 different endings, similar but different, that all express the same idea, namely genitive plural feminine. Finally, 2 more little things that we need to know in relation to nominal forms. First of all, articles. English has a definite and an indefinite article. A definite article refers to something specific, such as, "Ooh, there's the cat," referring to, I assume, some cat that you've seen before or referred to before. Whereas the indefinite article refers to something general. "There's a cat" means that there is a cat that you apparently don't know anything else about. Sanskrit has neither of those, neither a definite nor an indefinite article, and therefore we rely on context to know what exactly a Sanskrit sentence means. In Sanskrit, I would say general sees army, which in English would then mean the general sees the army, the general sees an army. It could even mean the general sees his army. A general sees the army, a general sees an army, and so on. Sanskrit just says general sees army, but because sentences always occur in some kind of context, that context will then point us to the right English translation using a definite or an indefinite article. And finally, there are postpositions. Now, if you remember when we talked about how English expresses case roles, prepositions were one of the ways. So, for example, if I want to express an instrument, I would do that by means of the preposition with. He cuts the cake with a knife. Sanskrit has a much smaller number of these little words, and we actually don't call them prepositions but postpositions because, unlike in English, these words are not put pre the noun, prepositions, but they're put post the noun, they're put behind the noun, and therefore they are postpositions. Now, the Sanskrit sentence that you see here shows you how postpositions work, but it also gives you another illustration of the point that was made about articles just now. So we have mitraich saha, literally friends with, gurham prati, house towards, gachati, which means he goes, she goes, it goes. So we need the context to infer, is it he goes, she goes, it goes? Then gurham prati, house towards, could be towards the house, towards a house, towards his house. If it's a female subject, towards her house. But anyway, we need to supply an article or something like his or her in the English, and we need to change the word order, so it's not house towards, but towards the house. And then finally, the same thing applies to friends with, mitraich saha, which would have to mean with friends, with his friends, with her friends, again with a changed word order, not friends with, but with friends, and again with something more specifying inserted in between, with his friends, with her friends, and so on.